I'm going to attempt to tell you the story of two teams, but one organization that blended together to create one of the best Korean teams that there has been so far in the whole of Overwatch. And when we talk about the history of Korean rosters, it's a little bit more difficult than the Western teams for me, coming from the Western perspective, because a lot of the Korean beta history in Overwatch and kind of early 2016 seems to be very difficult to actually find documentation on or results and stuff like this. I think a lot of websites only really started getting ticking and really noticing the Korean scene and starting to build them into Western websites about the middle of 2016. So it's a little bit sparse when you go so far back. And this video might also be a little bit difficult because, as I say, I'm trying to blend in both of the stories of these two teams. So let's start at the beginning. This organization is called Luxury Watch. Their teams are called LW Red and LW Blue. They begin with LW Red as their primary team. And if you know anything about pre-Overwatch League Overwatch, the team that you've heard of probably is LW Blue, the team that went on to become the New York Excelsior, with guys like Janus. Flower was signed onto the team but was too young to play. With Sabiolbi, of course, as well as Meko, guys like this. And this was their B team. Luxury Watch Blue was their secondary team, their sister team, the one that they thought was the worst of the two, going right back to the beginning when they first had these two rosters. So the first thing that Westerners heard of Luxury Watch in general was rumors of an incredibly strong team in Korea that people had been scrimming against, because the Koreans had been scrimming on 200 ping with some North American teams. And they had two star DPS players that really were the focal point of the team and what a lot of the talk in circles of the Overwatch scene was about. And these two players were Pine and Flower. Both now playing in Season 1 for, well, Flower's not actually playing, but he's signed to the same kind of organization. Pine and Flower, both with New York Excelsior at the moment. Flower, because he's too young, having to play for the academy team in Season 1. But these guys were both together on Luxury Watch Red, and were one of the reasons that they had respect from even the Western players who didn't know too much about them, because they had been playing on high ping and stuff like that, and been playing against some of the North American teams. So along with Lunatic High and Afrika Freaks Blue, they really made up the three teams that people had heard of out of the Koreans before any tournaments had really happened that had any kind of international basis, and certainly before any tournaments like Apex had been streamed to an English audience as well. So if you wanted to actually try and find VODs, you'd have to dig through Korean websites and try and find some kind of VOD streaming site like Afrika TV and watch Korean VODs. Not many people did, but they were still aware of these big three teams because they were making such a ruckus over in Korea, and people respected the Korean scene from stuff like League of Legends. And then Luxury Watch Red actually competed in a North American tournament, and this was in September 2016, I believe. And they're obviously playing on 200 ping because they're over from North America, but this is supposed to be one of the best teams in Korea. And to be fair, they only played their only major opponents in this Gosu Gamer Weekly were Splice, which I think at the time had guys like Graceful and Pure and people like that on. It may have had Clockwork at the time, I'm not sure. And Team Solo Mid, which was not Team Solo Mid, TSM. It was kind of a mockery of that name before all the big organizations started coming in. And so to be fair, it was a weak tournament, but the Koreans were playing on 200 ping. They came in and they basically smoked everybody. They played incredibly. And the series against Splice as well, it was fairly close. But again, Luxury Watch Red won. And I think some people who watch it really remember that one with a lot of it kind of sparked a lot of people's love for the game, because they went on a double overtime push and had a crazy push all the way through King's Row in overtime. So they captured a lot of hearts and souls of fans over in North America as well, because they respected the fact that this Korean team came over and just smacked a load of what were tier 2 teams for sure in North America around. And then one of the very early tournaments in Korea was called the Overwatch Power League. And again, Luxury Watch Red, the better team of the Luxury Watch teams, went and competed in that. And this time they did come up against strong competition. They were against Lunatic High. Now, this was the Lunatic High with Dean and Lee Tae-jun that they placed highly in APAC with and that they played Apex Season 1 with. And Luxury Watch Red beat Lunatic High twice throughout the double elim bracket to be able to win the tournament. And one of the few teams ever, in fact, one of only 2 teams ever, I believe, to have beaten Lunatic High twice ever. Not just within one tournament, but twice ever. Along with GC Busan, they were the other team to beat Lunatic High twice, and that again was in the same tournament, again double elimination, and again won the tournament. So maybe this is the key to winning tournaments against Lunatic High. And so this was Luxury Watch Red. People respected them. They knew that they had crazy DPS. They'd come over to North America and shown that they were a fantastic level team. Playing on 200 ping, they were still able to beat most of the tier, well, not most of, but some of the tier 2 teams that were playing around at the time. But what was happening with Luxury Watch Blue at this point? Because Luxury Watch Blue is the team that ended up, the core of it ended up becoming New York Excelsior. So what were they doing? So at this time in kind of September, they were an unrecognizable team from what they are currently. They didn't really have a core similar at all. Luna and Gambler were there as captains. The 2 support players were there, and those guys played much later in Apex and got cut or left just before the team was picked up by the Overwatch League. But so these guys were here as the supports, as the captains, but then they were surrounded by other people that you probably haven't heard of that played on a lot of low-level Korean teams, guys like Freeze, Hidden, The Hell, but they also had Kaiser on tank, actually. Now, if you're familiar with Runaway at all in the pre-Overwatch League, Kaiser was a player for them, moved over to Cloud9, a big fan favorite with a lot of Western fans, and he used to play on Luxury Watch Blue way back in the day in September 2016. But as I say, the point here is that it had an unrecognizable core. All of Luxury Watch's focus was on this top team, this LW Red team, and their sister team, the B team, wasn't really having any results at all. Now, Luxury Watch Blue actually played in that same Gosu Gamer Weekly, the one over in North America, the same one that Luxury Watch Red won, but they didn't even get to face a North American team. Because of the random seeding of the bracket, they actually got seeded against Luxury Watch Red in the first round and ended up losing to them 2-0. So we didn't really get a sense for how good they were. But as I say, this was an unrecognizable core. The only 2 players that carried on in the capacity to form that core were Luna and Gambler, the support captains. The Luxury Watch seemed like they were happy with Red. They were one of the best teams in Korea, if not the best team in Korea. You know, they'd been beaten Lunatic High. I believe they'd been beaten Afrika Freaks Blue as well. They looked to be the best team in Korea. Yes, it was very early days, but they were a force to be reckoned with. Luxury Watch Blue was happy with Red, but they weren't so happy with Blue. Blue wasn't having the same kind of results that they were wanting, and so they tried to reform Luxury Watch Blue to qualify both of their teams for Apex Season 1. Apex Season 1, this huge tournament by OGN, became essentially the biggest tournament outside of Overwatch League before it kicked off. And so they wanted both of their teams in there. So they thought, Blue, this team's too shit at the moment. We need to bring in some new players. So this is where your recognizable players came into Luxury Watch Blue. Just before October, Sabiolbi, Janus, and Meko, I think his name is actually pronounced Janus, but most people say Janus. Sabiolbi, Janus, and Meko were added to the team, along with Luna and Gambler staying there, to form what's considered the core of Luxury Watch Blue. And they basically stayed with the team until November, maybe October, November 2017. So this is a year-long run with these 5 players. And then they also had a guy called No Name on DPS. So this was the reform of Luxury Watch Blue. They were happy with Red, they reformed Blue, trying to qualify for Apex Season 1. Now, disaster struck for Luxury Watch because their main roster, Luxury Watch Red, the team that was touted as possibly the best team in Korea at this time, and this was in October 2016. They failed to qualify for Apex Season 1. This was an enormous upset. Apex Season 1 had 16 slots, so theoretically, if the format for qualifying was fair or reasonable or gave you enough opportunities to get in, you should have the top 16 teams in Korea there. So the fact that Luxury Watch Red, one of the best teams, like considered a top 3 team in Korea, if not one of the best, or if not the best, failed to qualify for the major tournament in Korea. This was crazy at the time. And the fact was that they had lost 2 best-of-3s in an offline qualifier. So they'd gone to kind of like a LAN cafe setup to qualify for Apex. And they had lost 2 best-of-3s to a complete amateur team coming out of nowhere called Runaway. Now, at the time, nobody had heard of Runaway. Nobody knew what they were going to do. Nobody knew kind of what potential they had and the players that they were playing with. Runaway had literally come out of nowhere as an unsponsored team, just an amateur organization, a team nobody had heard of, but recognized their captain because he was a streamer. And they'd beaten one of the best teams in Korea twice in 2 best-of-3s to knock them out of Apex qualifiers and qualify in their place for Apex Season 1. This was unbelievable. At the time, people were thinking, okay, what was it? You guys were playing on 60 hertz monitors at the LAN Cafe qualifiers. Did that reduce the playing field in some sense? This was a mad upset, and people were trying to come up with reasons as to why Luxury Watch Red would have failed to qualify. Now, really, when we look back at this in hindsight, it's probably because Runaway were actually just a really good team with sick potential and managed to pull it off. I think they were playing a lot around NYXL at that point. NYXL had come out of nowhere, this brand new, incredibly young GyeongGi talent, really able to go head-to-head with Pine and Flower in probably a way that they hadn't seen from many other teams, and they stole the show away from them. So while that disaster was happening for Luxury Watch Red, their prime team, Luxury Watch Blue actually snuck in and qualified for Apex Season 1 with this reformed roster that they'd only had together for a couple of weeks at that time, I think. Maybe just under a month. They managed to sneak in and qualify for Apex Season 1. So now Luxury Watch are in a weird position where their second best team, their B team, are in the Premier Tournament, but their top team has to play in Challengers, has to play in the second tier. So they've kind of done a flip, even though they internally still think that Luxury Watch Red are the better team, although they must have had some respect for Luxury Watch Blue or really thought that they had potential to improve, etc. after that performance. But for them, it was like everything flipped upside down, went topsy-turvy. And it wasn't like Blue immediately clicked. It wasn't like Luxury Watch Blue were immediately a top-tier team, like on the caliber of where they ended up. They were still fairly middling. When we saw them play in Apex, when we saw them play before Apex, just a week or so after they had qualified for Apex Season 1, they played a qualifier for a tournament called MSI MGA. And they lost to Kongdu Unsia, who were, at the time, again, a middling team. They were the B team of Kongdu. They hadn't risen up to be a top team towards the end of Apex Season 1 or be respected and etc. They were just a middling team in terms of the top 20 teams in Korea. And they had beaten Luxury Watch Blue. So it's not like they formed this roster and immediately clicked, but they did manage to make it into Apex Season 1, and that is basically how this story begins. Because once they had this team in Apex Season 1, they were able to actually see what was happening with Luxury Watch Blue and have them face what should be the top talent in Korea and the West. 4 Western teams came over to Apex Season 1, and one of them, Reunited, was placed in the group with Luxury Watch Blue. Luxury Watch Blue had a reasonable performance in Apex Season 1. They managed to beat Runaway, the team that had knocked out their sister team, so this was already like a fantastic development for them. They surely, coming into this match, must have respected Runaway for their upset potential, if nothing else. Because Runaway at this point are still unproven. People thought it was just lucky that they'd managed to beat Luxury Watch Red twice. And then they're in a group with the sister team of Luxury Watch. The Blue come out on top there, and Blue actually beat Kongdu Panthera as well, who were just starting to find their footing. They were still very much a middling team. But they lost to Reunited. Reunited, the Western team coming over. They just had a bit of a disappointing showing at the Overwatch Open, and they were actually playing with a substitute as well, but they got their shit together. They were still a top Western team, and they beat Luxury Watch Blue. Luxury Watch Blue still managed to make it to the playoffs. They played against a team called BK Star, who had Carpe and Bunny playing for them in the DPS slots, 2 Overwatch League Season 1 players. And they got smashed, 3-0. Luxury Watch Blue failed to make it through the playoffs. They got knocked out in the quarterfinals. Again, a middling result for them. They didn't look like a top team. They looked like a solid team. They had decent teamwork. They'd had a couple of good results, more than people were expecting from the B team of Luxury Watch. But people still had this narrative that Red were the better team. And the reason for this is that Red fucking dunked on challengers. Red went crazy. Luxury Watch Red were like sandbagging. They went 11-0 in this round-robin tournament, beat every other team, and in terms of map score, Luxury Watch Red went 33-3. Now, this is insane levels of dominance, right? This is a team that shouldn't be in challenges. This is a team that either got unlucky in the way that they were qualifying and unlucky in the sense that they ran into Runaway twice, or choked in the qualifier, or whatever the case may be. It's clear that Red were miles ahead of the competition in Apex Challengers and were more on the level of the Apex teams. So people still had this narrative that Red are the better team than Blue. They just failed to make it through the qualifier. They kind of choked when it mattered, and now they're just stuck in challenges. So the great thing about that period of Korean Overwatch and Western Overwatch for that matter is that you had lots of little cups happening at the same time. So one of them was the Nexus Cup Halloween, and in the qualifiers for that, in the Korean qualifiers to see which teams would represent Korea. Sorry, I've got a terrible cough at the moment. Luxury Watch Red beat Mighty AOD, another challenger team, and Kongdu Unsia, the team that had beaten Luxury Watch Blue a couple of weeks before that, to stop Luxury Watch Blue qualifying for MSI MGA. So Red beat both of these two teams, some decent but more middling teams. But so this was just expected performance from Red, who was still considered one of the best teams, and qualified for the Nexus Cup Halloween. They beat all the Chinese teams there, as was expected of the Korean teams at the time, but they lost twice to Kongdu Panthera. And Kongdu Panthera had gotten a huge amount better. So Luxury Watch Blue managed to beat Kongdu Panthera in the group stage of Apex Season 1. But then Kongdu Panthera, just something clicked with them. They managed to get hold of the meta. They managed to get their teamwork together. Their individual performance was getting much stronger. And they'd been on an unbeaten streak in terms of online competition for a while. So Luxury Watch Red came second in that tournament behind Kongdu Panthera. But this was still considered a very respectable performance for the top team of Luxury Watch, and was indicative of where people expected them to be. They expected them to be a good level Apex team at worst, frankly. Red then went into Apex Challengers Season 2, and they again battered the competition, apart from Meta Athena, who were on their own winning streak at the time. They went 10-1 in terms of matches won, and in terms of maps, they went 30-8. So again, really dominant streak. Red are looking like the best or the second best team in challenges, because Meta Athena were also having a crazy run, and this was almost like sandbagging. As I said, Luxury Watch Red were clearly in kind of the wrong pool here. They still had Pine and Flower. They were still going nuts. They were just dunking on everybody. They were much better DPS players than the people that they were playing against. So they qualified for Super Week. Super Week is the promotion relegation system of Apex. So this was their opportunity to get back into Apex. But before they could go into that and qualify for Apex Season 2, where they really wanted to be, the big leagues, what they'd missed out on beforehand, before they could do that qualifier was a couple of weeks away, they got an invite to a championship called IEM GyeongGi. And this was an ESL championship that had 6 invited teams. 2 teams got a bye to the semi-finals, and Luxury Watch was given an invite. Now, Luxury Watch, the organization, was given an invite, weirdly, and decided to field, on paper, they said, Luxury Watch Red. Now, for people, when they were looking at that from the outside, that seemed to fit the narrative of Luxury Watch Blue have been having middling results in Apex Season 1. Luxury Watch Red have been dunking on the competition, but haven't had a chance to play the Apex teams. So it seemed like the organization agreed with the outside perspective that Luxury Watch Red might still be the better team, even though Luxury Watch Blue was having decent performances. But they didn't actually feel that. So while this was going on, while Luxury Watch Red were styling all over everybody and had their names written down, Luxury Watch Blue beat Meta Athena, the team that Luxury Watch Red had lost to, but lost to Kongdu Unsia. So again, these kind of middling teams, the top of Apex Challengers and the middling teams of Apex Season 1, are all kind of trading results off each other in online tournaments. So they failed to make the Nexus Cup for winter as well. And the organization had to choose which team to field. Do they field Luxury Watch Blue, who've been having solid results and even beat Meta Athena, who Luxury Watch Red lost to, but haven't been making it deep in tournaments and just have kind of more solid teamwork across the board? Do you field that roster? Or do you field the more spicy Luxury Watch Red, who are really a very heavy dive team? They put a lot of resources into Pine and Flower and just allow them to go style on people. It absolutely dominates against lower level competition, but they've had a couple of upsets, right? They lost to Kongdu Panthera, but that was understandable. And they also lost to Meta Athena in challenges. So the organization had a choice with which team. They actually went for a blend of them, which I like to call Luxury Watch Purple. Nobody else calls it Luxury Watch Purple, but that's a combination red and blue, right? I don't see how this wasn't a thing. But the organization decided to call it Luxury Watch Red. They fielded it under the Luxury Watch Red name, but it actually wasn't Luxury Watch Red at all. So only one player from Luxury Watch Red, Flower, their star DPS player, if you can even say that, because Pine is almost as good as Flower, almost was at the time. But he was more, Flower at the time was more of the flex DPS, like the Genji for the team and stuff like this. Pine was more of the hit scan. He was playing the McCree, the Tracer, the Widowmaker, stuff like this. And so Luxury Watch decided that keeping the core of Luxury Watch Blue, apart from No Name, the DPS player, so they dropped No Name, and they substituted in Flower. So now they had, instead of having two fairly strong hit scan DPS players on Luxury Watch Blue, they had replaced No Name with Flower, giving them a very strong flex DPS to go alongside a strong hit scan DPS from Sabiorbi, and the teamwork of Luxury Watch Blue, and fielded that roster for IEM GyeongGi. Now, annoyingly, they called it Luxury Watch Red. It's very confusing if you go back and have a look at it. I'm going to call it Luxury Watch Purple, okay? But if you ever look back, you've got to remember that IEM GyeongGi was Luxury Watch Purple. It was this mixed roster. So they started the tournament. As I said, two teams got byes to the semi-final, but Luxury Watch was not one of those. So they had to start from the quarterfinals. They played Kongdu Panthera. Now, as I mentioned, Kongdu Panthera had been on a crazy win streak up to this point. All of the what do you call them? Like rumors of scrim results and stuff like this of the Western teams that were over in Korea said Kongdu Panthera is on a mad streak at the moment. They're almost unbeatable in scrims. They look like the best team in Korea in scrims. And they've been going on this long streak online, but they were knocked out really early in Apex Season 1, so they couldn't quite show that in terms of having a deep run in the LAN tournament. So they came in, and instantly Luxury Watch looked sick. They 3-0'd Kongdu Panthera, who'd been on a really hot streak. Now, Kongdu Panthera had made a couple of roster changes, but they 3-0'd them, and they looked incredible. Flower was playing amazingly. Sabiorbi looked like he'd been unleashed by having this extra partner who was able to create space for him, and the other people had to focus as well. Then they went on to play Rogue, the new Rogue lineup that had just switched themselves around and tried to make kind of a francophone roster after having removed the Swedish players, after they left, rather. They 3-1'd this new Rogue team that, yes, they were trying to find themselves still, and they were very good players with a lot of experience and LAN championships up the wazoo, but they just shuffled their roster as well. But they 3-1'd them. They pretty much destroyed them. They were excellent at playing triple tank, which was kind of the accepted meta at the time, but they also played a huge amount of dive, like putting resources onto Flower as well and playing the Winston dive, and played phenomenally at that as well. So they went into the finals. On the other side of the bracket, Lunatic High met them. Lunatic High, very powerful team. Again, this was with Dina Lee Tae-jun, but they were a very well-respected team in Korea, one of the best teams in Korea for sure, and they 3-1 Lunatic High to win the tournament. Won 3 best-of-5s in this tournament, only dropped 2 maps, incredible run from them. They looked clinical. Their teamwork was down. Sabiorbi, as I said, was unleashed and was playing fantastically, but Flower was the star of the show. He had been brought in from this team, languishing in challenges, unable to show himself on the big stage, couldn't even play at LAN, was having to play online games in challenges again and again, day in, day out. Finally gets allowed his time on the stage and destroys everyone. The guy played unreal. He was just the best DPS player in that tournament. He played fantastically. And so the narrative was so strong. And this is really where this big Flower narrative was born as well. Because he was the missing piece for Luxury Watch. Absolutely. For Luxury Watch Blue, that is. Or Purple. But he had to return to Luxury Watch Red. Because they still, as I said, had to play this qualifier promotion relegation system to get into Apex. So this was Flower's chance. He'd already proven that he can play at this kind of level. He'd already won a championship with his sister team. Everyone knew that he was a star, and the rest of his team was supposed to be stars as well, just had choked or been unlucky in terms of running into the runaway twice. So they go into this promotion relegation system and try and get out of challenges. They have a rematch against Runaway, who underperformed in their first season of Apex and were also in the promotion relegation system. They were in there with a Freak of Freaks Red and Runaway and bloody MVP Space or something like that. Luxury Watch Red lost 0-3 against Runaway. Like, the choke of a lifetime. They wanted it so badly. They were in that game to win it. This was their opportunity for revenge. They could knock Runaway down to challengers and go and take their spot, and they lost 0-3. Their teamwork fell apart. It was like they were all trying to make individual plays. Perhaps, you know, in their heads, they're just thinking about the shuffle that may be to come with Luxury Watch. Who knows? But it was a big underperformance for the team. And then they also lost 2-3 to Afrika Freaks Red, a team that they'd never lost to before, that was in Challenger. Yes, they were at the top of Challenger, but they'd never lost to them before. They lost 2-3 to them and 0-3 to Runaway, and they were out. They were not in Apex Season 2. They were back into Challenger. This was a massive disappointment for the organization and for the players in that team. Flower had gone from winning a championship against the best teams in Korea and some of the best teams in the West as well, and then had gone straight from that to failing to qualify into the top 16 teams in Korea. How is it even possible? It was mental. It made the whole Red team reform. The whole of Luxury Watch Red, the organization just pulled the plug on it and was like, right, we give up on you guys. This core is not working for some reason. The only player they kept, I believe, was Pine, the guy that they had focused their team around, as well as Flower, and they shifted Flower into Luxury Watch Blue to make this purple roster permanent, and they called it Blue. So the same purple roster that played as Luxury Watch Red and IEM GyeongGi then became Luxury Watch Blue. I mean, what were they doing? So after the IEM GyeongGi win and after Luxury Watch Red had folded because they, well, not folded, but reformed because they couldn't qualify for Apex Season 2, Luxury Watch Blue became the roster with Flower and not No Name. No Name went to join Pine in Luxury Watch Red in Challengers, again, Challengers Season 3. And Luxury Watch Blue came into Apex Season 2 with a whole different attitude about them and a whole different attitude from their opponents as well, because they were now one of the favorites. They just won IEM GyeongGi with this exact same roster. They came in for Apex Season 2, and I would say, actually, that they were the favorites for that season, I think. They were the slight favorites over Lunatic High, who were also very heavily respected as another top team, and they were actually in the same group as them. Again, Apex somehow comes up with these group of deaths every single season, or did. No longer exists, rest in peace. So they were in a very difficult group with Lunatic High and with Misfits, this brand new Swedish Misfits team. Luxury Watch Blue started with a 3-1 win over Misfits, playing a sick triple tank lineup, the same as they had been for various maps at IEM GyeongGi. They looked fantastic. Sebiolbi's over on Roadhog, absolutely destroying fools. Flower again is allowed to play Genji and also allowed to play basically whatever he wants as the sole DPS on the team. Playing fantastic. Then when they came up against Lunatic High, for whatever reason they decided not to go tank v tank against Lunatic High, and they tried to tank v dive, because Lunatic High at the time were favoring dive, because they just brought in Who Are You onto the team, this Star Genji player, or this young up and coming Star Genji. And they decided just to go dive v dive. They trusted Flower, they thought their team cohesion would work slightly better, and they just decided to go head-to-head with them in dive, and unfortunately they lost 1-3. The games were very close. It was a tough series between two very strong teams in Korea, but Lunatic High came out on top, and so Luxury Watch Blue got second in the group. They went into the playoff situation, and they had a nail-biting loss to Kongdu Panthera. It was an insanely good game. Definitely one that I would recommend if you want to go back and watch some incredible triple tank gameplay from two of the best triple tank teams with slightly different styles, unique strategies as well that people were coming out with at the time. And actually, Luxury Watch Blue went up 2-0 in that series, and Kongdu Panthera came back for a three map in a row reverse sweep against them. It was a fantastic game against two titans that had faced off again in IEM GyeongGi as well. And Luxury Watch Blue came out with a win, so this was Kongdu Panthera getting revenge on them. Then Luxury Watch Blue played against Afrika Freaks Blue, again another top Korean team, and beat them 3-2. Luxury Watch Afrika Freaks Blue weren't having the best of seasons, but they were still a solid team, and they managed to reach the finals the previous season. And Luxury Watch Blue managed to beat them 3-2. So now they get a rematch against Kongdu Panthera. They get to fight against the same team that they have previously, and they tactically pick them apart. Kongdu Panthera were usually a very good team on defense with their triple tank, and they suffered slightly on the offense. But the strategies that they were using on the defense on a lot of these maps like Numbani, were completely ruined by Luxury Watch Blue. They picked them to pieces. And so they actually won the rematch 3-2 and closed out the series where previously they had been reverse swept. So they managed to make it to the semi-finals. Now again, Luxury Watch faced Runaway. This never-ending rivalry between the two organizations as Luxury Watch Blue took on Runaway in the semi-finals. And this run from Runaway seemed almost unstoppable, with Kaiser on tank, a guy that had played for Luxury Watch Blue back in September 2016. They had an amazing performance. Again, another cracker of a game. Apex Season 2 was a fantastic tournament, and Runaway actually beat them 3-2 to knock them out the tournament and advance to the finals and face Lunatic Eye. So this was a very good run, actually, from Luxury Watch Blue. They had a very difficult bracket going through it. They were in a group with Lunatic Eye and Misfits. Then they had to play against Kongdu Panthera and Afrika Freaks Blue. And then they had to play against Runaway. Basically, they only had one easy game the entire tournament, I think. And the only easy game that they had was in the groups where they had to play against Afrika Freaks Red. Apart from that, they played basically the top teams that you possibly could in Apex Season 2. And they still managed to make it to the semi-finals, and they still only lost 3-2. So I think this is a fantastic performance from them as their first outing in Apex as a top team, as a team that should have been getting these kind of performances. And this is the theme going forwards for them, is consistency. They're consistently able to make deep runs, but unfortunately they lacked some kind of clutch potential, or occasionally like their teamwork fell apart, or they just weren't able to get this... A lot of the time, what it actually came to in the playoffs was they weren't able to read their opponent properly, whereas their opponent was able to read them. So a lot of the time, they got outplayed in terms of the meta strategy between the two teams. Maybe their coaches weren't putting in enough... perhaps that's a little harsh to say they weren't putting in enough work, but perhaps their coaches just didn't catch things that other coaches did that allowed their opponents to get the edge in these games. Now, another thing that cropped up in Apex Season 2 and plagued this team basically for the rest of its existence was that Flower, their star player, had developed a finger injury. And I'm not 100% sure what the finger injury was. I think it was like tendonitis or whatever they call it, where you get inflammation in the tendons, and it causes you pain and stiffness when you play for too long. And so Flower, their star player, this young guy who had been so dramatically improving their team right from as soon as he entered their roster, unfortunately wasn't living up to his potential that we'd seen from him in IEM GyeongGi and we'd seen from him in Luxury Watch Red. He wasn't having as explosive performances, really, in Apex Season 2 and certainly in Apex Season 3. It was Sabiolbi doing most of the hard carrying for the team rather than Flower, when actually the way that the team was originally set up, it was the other way around, and Sabiolbi was designed to be more of the guy in the back, whereas they were going to put all of their resources on Flower. But Flower didn't have these kind of explosive performances again, and although he was very good, he never really hit the same peaks as he did at IEM GyeongGi, to the point where people were calling him like the best DPS player in the world. I thought he started to slip in terms of his performance, and it actually looked quite quiet in a lot of their games later in playoffs. And I assume that this is because of the finger injury. I mean, this also could be stuff like playoff pressure or playing a LAN, or these kind of things. Difficult to say. Moving into Apex Season 3, they still had this issue, but they had a much easier group, a far easier group compared to Apex Season 2 when they were in the group of death. They were still respected as a top team, but at this point, Runaway, Lunatic Eye, Kongdu Panthera, Afrika Freaks Blue, who just reformed their roster, these are all very strong teams as well. But they had a much easier group, as I said. They really had no other top team in their group. Again, the group of death happened in Apex, but it was elsewhere, so that meant everyone else had easier groups. So they only had... the next best team was Conbox. And Conbox, although they occasionally have upset potential, or had upset potential in previous seasons of Apex, were not on the same level as the top tier teams in Apex at all, or top tier teams in Korea. So without any other top team to face in the groups, they went 9-2 on maps, won all three of their series, and got the first seed in their group. Now, the way the Apex playoffs works is that you get to select your opponents, and due to a weird quirk of the seeding, they actually ended up in a playoff group, again with Conbox, who they played in the group with already, and they knew that they could smash. But they also ended up in a playoff group with Lunatic High and Kongdu Panthera. And this was the same season that Lunatic High and Kongdu Panthera had already played in Group A, I think, against Rogue. So this was mental. This had got both Lunatic High and Kongdu Panthera had gone from the group of death with Rogue as well and Mighty AOD, utterly unbelievable group of death, over to the playoff draw of death, where they are in like their own small GSL style playoff group with Luxury Watch Blue as well. So Luxury Watch Blue had a big hill to climb. They were going to have to defeat one of the favorites for the tournament, whether that be Lunatic High or Kongdu Panthera, to be able to advance. And so this, I think, puts their... I'll explain what happened. So Luxury Watch Blue beat Conbox. They knew they could do it. They smashed them in groups. They beat them again 3-1. Then they went on to play Kongdu Panthera, but unfortunately, Janus had a pneumothorax, which is a hole in the lung. It's where your little lining of the lung bursts and you get air into your chest cavity. And it's a medical emergency, but quite easily treated. So he had to go into hospital for a couple of days and was unfortunately unable to play in this incredibly important game where they were playing against Kongdu Panthera. Probably the more beatable of the two teams that they had to beat one of them, right? And if you're not gonna, you have less chance of beating Lunatic High than you do of Kongdu Panthera. So you want everyone there to play against Panthera. Unfortunately, they didn't have their main tank, and they don't have a backup main tank at all. They do now with Mano on New York Excelsior, but they didn't at the time. So they put Luna, their flex support, onto tank, and they put Pine, their sub, onto the support role. Unfortunately, that led to them losing 1-3. They still played reasonably well. They still made the series quite close, which makes you wonder what would have happened if they had their full team there and they were playing at their peak. But unfortunately, they lost. So they had to go down to the lower bracket of this playoff group, and they had to face Lunatic High. And Lunatic High destroyed them, eviscerated them, wasn't close. Janus was back, actually. Janus had returned and had a couple of days of scrims, so maybe they weren't at their peak form, and certainly they were playing sloppily. There were some positioning errors and how they were taking fights and stuff, but Lunatic High just absolutely wrecked them, and this is kind of the playoff game that comes to mind for me when I say that Luxury Watch Blue never really try to counter their opponent's style. They just play their game and open themselves up to be encountered, because Lunatic High had this strategy where they were just going to use a Escaron Sombra, so they're running a Sombra Tracer style. They would hack the enemy Diva and instantly demech Meko, and then they'd be able to kill Janus straight away as well. So they'd just eviscerate their tanks and just be able to wipe the floor with them in team fights over and over again. And actually, Luxury Watch Blue then, in that game, were running Pine over Luna. So even though they got Janus back in, and Luna didn't have to play tank anymore, Luna actually didn't play flex support either. They liked Pine on flex support so much they kept him in. Now Flower, as I said before, again didn't play that well in Apex Season 3, whether this was because of wrist issues or extraneous problems or playoff joke or whatever it was. But still, what you have to realize is that Luxury Watch Blue made it as far as possible and beat every team that wasn't an absolute elite team. Like, they just happened to get a ridiculous playoff group that saw them face the first and second best teams in Korea, much like Rogue did in the group stage, and made it as far as they possibly could before hitting that roadblock. So again, this was consistency. This team is consistency incarnate. But unfortunately, unable to make the finals, unable to make the championship run, other than this fantastic performance at IEM GyeongGi in December of 2016. So then we get the transition period as Luxury Watch Blue moved into becoming New York Excelsior. So Gambler left the team. That was their Lucio and Mercy player. Very good Mercy, actually, as well. And I believe one of the callers for the team as well. And if you'll remember, we were talking about them before, Luna and Gambler were the two support captains that had gone back all the way to September of 2016, and now they were leaving in, I want to say, September of 2017, I think it was. So Gambler left, and the team signed Mano as like a backup tank, or possibly their main tank, and having Janus be the backup tank. Also, just a good move, because Janus at this point had been prone to injury, although he had surgery for his pneumothorax and therefore shouldn't have had recurring issues there, and hopefully doesn't in the future. And then Luna was kicked from the roster as well, and they caused a whole load of drama, which I won't get into, but they essentially kicked Luna from the roster, leaving open a flex support slot, and signed a guy who had been annihilating the competitive ladder over in Korea on Ana and Zenyatta, called Jonak, who is playing for them in New York Excelsior. Sylph, who was one of their backup supports, also retired, and the rest of the team was signed to New York Excelsior. At this point, it was only reported that they were signed for New York Excelsior, although this was obviously the case. Never doubt Jacob Wolf. So we had a situation where we knew that Lunatic High were Seoul Dynasty, and we knew that Luxury Watch Blue were going to be New York Excelsior, and Apex Season 4 was coming up. So we thought, great, we'll be able to watch Apex Season 4 with these two teams. Possibly another Korean team gets picked up, as they did with Gyeonggi Panthera and GC Busan, actually, both getting picked up for London Spitfire. So we'll be able to watch kind of a mini preview of what some of the best teams in Overwatch League should look like. This will be fantastic. Unfortunately, Luxury Watch Blue, New York Excelsior, dropped out of Apex Season 4 before playing any of their games, and the reason why is still a bloody mystery. We don't know whether it was because they were trying to move over to the United States and try and integrate their players, perhaps whether they were trying to focus on stuff like media promotion, teaching their players English, rather than focusing on playing games. Hell, maybe they wanted to play just with their new recruits, because they signed just after that Arc, who is their Lucio main support player, and Libero, who's just kind of like an all-round backup player for anything, and also a pretty good DPS player as well. So maybe they wanted to play with their new lineup for New York Excelsior and didn't want to be limited by Apex. Hell, maybe they didn't want to play on the patch because Apex limits you to previous patches at times. Maybe they just want to stay up to date and play scrims on the regular patch. So whatever the reason was, we did not get to see this team in Apex Season 4. That means the last time the gap has been largest for any of the currently existing top tier teams between when they last competed, when they came third in Apex Season 3, all the way up to... did they come third in Apex Season? No, they didn't. They came in they came in Apex Season 3. So when they finished in the playoffs of Apex Season 3, up until the Overwatch League, when they begin as New York Excelsior, has been one of the largest gaps out of any of the well-known legendary teams. So there's still a lot of question marks here. How will Jonak perform, this brand new player who's just been brought out of essentially ranked? He's almost got no matches on his history at all. How will Arc play, a guy who only played for Luxury Watch Red when they were playing at a much lower level? How will the team play without their star player Flower, whose finger injuries seem to be recovered somewhat, and is too young to play for the roster, and so will have to sit it out for Overwatch League Season 1? Will they be able to recover? Will Pine take up that position as he kind of having more of a pivotal role like he did on the Luxury Watch Red of mid-2016? All of these questions remain to be answered, but one thing is absolutely for clear, and that is that Luxury Watch remain, and always will be, one of the legendary teams of the pre-Overwatch League era. And their story is an incredibly interesting one, which ties into a lot of other narratives.